There is a reason why they use the phrase "and they lived happily ever after" at the end of the story instead of near the beginning. Hi, this is Mike, and welcome to my vlog about football in general and Burnley FC in particular. A vlog that saw Mary Earps tell an entire country to F off and thought that's going to be a great meme. No game this week due to the rebuild of Luton's ground, which presents an interesting dilemma if you're trying to produce content on a regular basis. Do you take a week off recording this vlog, or do you look around and see if there's some kind of filler that you can use to talk about and fill about 10 minutes? Pause, look directly to camera. A little bit of parish notices. Thank you so much for the positive feedback about the racism blog from last week. It was really good feedback that I genuinely appreciate. The comments were better than I thought they were going to be. They were very welcome. They were very thoughtful. I appreciate them. Also, a shout out to No Day Never and the Turfcast pods, who also called out the racist booing for what it was, which was booing by racists. Just so you know, and there were some comments that got held by YouTube. I do get to see them. But those comments got held by YouTube. I wondered whether to actually allow them through because I can moderate the comments. But I decided I didn't want to give these people, these racists, the oxygen of publicity. To steal Linda Smith line, I don't really like giving these racists the oxygen of oxygen. So it was really good feedback. If I upset a few people, like I care, to be honest. But I think I came out ahead in terms of subscribers, lost a couple, gained some more, which is, a good thing. And thank you for your feedback. And hopefully, we can start doing something about the problem of racist booing at Burnley games, because ultimately the media's not interested. It's almost as if they're only interested in a problem to kind of tut about it, and it's too much hard work to look into the why and the how to fix it. And they kind of leave it to Burnley fans such as me, you, the people watching this, the podcasts that we do, the No Day Never and Turfcast and so on. It's like our problem to deal with, the club of, to deal with, and they just come along and decide whether we've done an adequate job or not. Kind of gives you an idea of the state of the media in this country. But the one thing I wanted to talk about this week was the Mission to Burnley documentary. I wasn't going to sort of pile through it and then kind of give you an instant hot take. I thought I'd watch it a couple of times and, then consider and, gather my thoughts on it. The Mission to Burnley documentary had clearly a goal at the start, and I think the participants in it had sort of their idea of what it's going to be. I think ALK considered it was going to be, sort of like a PR exercise for them. The programme makers, who previously made the excellent Sunderland Till I Die and the QPR one, the 4-year plan, I think they were kind of like sniffing around, thinking this could be a bit of a car crash like those particular documentaries. But ultimately, which way did it go? Well, to start off with a couple of negatives, I thought some of the conversations that were taking place were not really staged, but kind of pre-planned. It felt a little bit like some of the conversations between the backroom staff were more like exposition for an audience than actual fly on the wall sort of conversations. They didn't take me out of it or anything like that, but it kind of felt a little too convenient at times that the cameras just happened to be there while these important conversations setting out the risks and the issues took place. So that kind of didn't really kind of work for me. I've seen a lot of criticism from people saying it didn't show the things that they wanted it to show, which I think is a little bit unfair. The filmmakers never promised to show certain things. ALK probably never promised to show certain things. So for people like ourselves to decide what the film should be and then criticise it for not showing it seems to be a little unfair. I mean, if I had my way, I'd have dedicated an entire hour to the game at Ewood in April where, we won the title. But that was never going to happen. I'd have loved to see the backstage kind of arguments and discussions around the ticket allocation, about Alan Pace deciding not to go and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the target audience is not Burnley fans. It's not people like me or you watching this if you're a Claret. because that's a very small audience. The target audience was non-Burnley fans and people who don't know the story of the season. We know the story of the season inside out. I mean, I've watched the highlights of the games, coming on for 100 times over the season. So we are intimately familiar with the story. The audience the documentary was aiming for was non-Burnley fans, people who were not familiar with the club, the owners, the manager, or the story of that season. And feedback from plenty of the people who I know who are not Clarets fans has been very, very positive. Many thought it was an excellent behind-the-scenes look. They thought that they got an understanding of what ALK were trying to do. They ended up liking and sympathising with Alan Pace. And they realised that Vincent Kompany is a natural leader and a man manager. They didn't know the story of the season. They didn't know how successful it was. So, they found it interesting and they thought it was a entertaining, interesting insight into Burnley Football Club. And I think that's what everyone kind of wanted from the documentary in the first place. I think one of the interesting things is that ultimately there is no peril in the story. There is no drama. There is a reason why they use the phrase "and they lived happily ever after" at the end of the story instead of near the beginning. Well, Burnley FC had the perfect season last year, and the perfect season had started by the end of episode 1. So there's another 2.5 hours of basically everything going to plan. There's no drama, there's no peril. I mean, for the last 90 minutes, for the last basically 2 episodes, there's 2 losses to cover. And they focused on the Man City FA Cup game for most of that. So that serene, wonderful title march that we had has a flip side, which is if you're trying to produce a documentary and a story and you're trying to build a tense narrative, it just isn't there. And that's the risk, risks of documentaries is that they kind of, want to show things going wrong. They want there to be bad guys and good guys. But we had no going wrong. We had no bad guys. We had no tension. Everything went perfectly. And it's, credit to the filmmakers. They did manage to bring out some tension and a story around that, despite not really having the materials to work with. But that's sport and that's real life, and no one could have predicted it beforehand. So I'm not going to criticise them for that because, ultimately they've got to work with what they've got to work with. But I thought it was, as I say, in summary, I thought it was a really good documentary. I think it worked and achieved the aims that everyone wanted for it. And, if the filmmakers want to release the 300 hours of background footage on a special download through the club shop, then, shut up and take my money, really. But one of the issues that kind of came out of the documentary that I thought was kind of interesting, was very thought-provoking. There's a scene in the first episode where the Clarets have been relegated out of the Premier League, and Alan Pace walks back into the Chairman's Lounge followed by the camera. There's a couple of things there that are kind of interesting. One is that it's a little bit like a scene from a movie when you know that a character is about to be bumped off, where, they come into a room and no one goes anywhere near them. They are given that space. They are, no one wants to be anywhere near them when the gun is fired, for want of a better phrase. And to see that happening in real life was very, very interesting. But shortly after, there is a conversation with, I think it's a guy called Adrian Betteridge, and if I've got that wrong, I apologise, where he says that it's your club now, and you have no coattails to hang on to, which I think is a very revealing moment. Because if you consider, and the filmmakers have put that in for a reason, because they know how the story ends, if you consider where the club was at that moment, and where it became in quite a short amount of time, it's interesting to see the change that ALK made from top to bottom in the club, and how that has affected the club and how it has been 180 degrees from where we were. And the interesting question that popped in my head was, would that have happened if Sean Dyche was still the manager? ALK have decided to build the club a certain way. We see some of the changes like the social media strategy. We see the documentary, which significantly only begins when Sean Dyche is not there. And you can see that they brought in a certain transfer strategy, and that strategy is one that Vincent Kompany bought into. Find talent, buy it cheap, play them, sell them for a profit. VK bought into that, and he's clearly bought into that. He understands that is what Burnley have to do, and I understand it's what Burnley have to do in order to survive in the Premier League. But would Sean Dyche have understood that? I mean, imagine he had stayed and ALK had tried to rebuild in that similar fashion, in that similar style. I mean, we already saw the tensions with Dyche and the previous board over transfers. Hell, you know, right now, if you look at Everton over the summer, I had to laugh very darkly about some of the comments that he made at Everton about their transfer business. You know, the use of that phrase that we grew to love and hate, which was, it's a difficult transfer market. And we see now, with their tough start to the season, fans complaining that Dyche is too loyal to certain players who are out of form. And that's kind of where we were, you know, for the last 3 or 4 years under Dyche. And we were kind of blaming the board for it, but you begin to wonder, because the common factor is Dyche, you begin to wonder how much responsibility he had for us ending up in the transfer situation where that we ended up in with the stale squad that we had. It's kind of like, you know, when you see what ALK have done, maybe that wasn't the plan at the start, but maybe Alan Pace and Stuart Hunt and the rest of the board decided that that was the way they were going to go because it was going to be a clean sheet, because things had to change very, very quickly, and they got lucky, you know, in a good way, and I mean that in a good way. They got lucky, they found the right manager, they found the right strategy, they found the right players, and it all worked out. But I do wonder if that would have happened under Sean Dyche. Would we have got out of the Championship in this? Well, we certainly wouldn't have done it in the same style. We certainly wouldn't have done it with the same amount of points. Would we have even done it at all? And that's an interesting thing. But you know, that's not to knock Sean Dyche or disrespect his achievements at Burnley. Isn't it weird that Burnley fans always end up doing that? When we're talking about where the club is now and comparing it to where it was under Dyche, and we always sort of say a certain thing and then we scramble to go, but that's not a knock on Sean Dyche. We need a phrase for that. We need to call it the Dyche disclaimer or something like that. It was great under Dyche, but the Dyche disclaimer. Anyway, yeah, it's just interesting to sort of see or to consider whether the club would ultimately be better off without Sean Dyche. And I think that documentary is just further proof that for all the statements that were made by solid football men over the sacking of Sean Dyche, Alan Pace was right. I don't think he'll get apologies off the right people for it either. If you've got any comments about this video, please feel free to leave them down below and I will respond where I can. If you liked it, click the like button. And if you like what I do, have a look around the rest of the channel and click subscribe to be notified when I produce new content.